listening to episode 162 of the Tennis Files podcast, the best tennis rackets for your game with Jean-Pierre Jounier. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Tennis Files podcast. My name is Mirban Aranchad, a former Division I college tennis player, and on the show I interview the world's top pros, coaches, and experts to help you improve your tennis game. And today it's a pleasure to have Coach Jean-Pierre Jounier on the podcast. Jean-Pierre is a French tennis coach based in Bordeaux, and he's a racket expert with many, many reviews on his YouTube channels. And in the midst of researching a few rackets, I came across his reviews and it looked quite impressive, and I liked his work. So I figured, you know what, let's bring him on to the podcast. And he is also the creator of the Team Tennis French and Team Tennis English YouTube channels, which has a lot of great instruction and strategy advice, as well as these racket reviews. And Jean-Pierre also has practiced with some pro tennis players before, so he is not only adept at teaching and gear reviews, but also a great player as well. So you're going to, on this episode, hear about the different types of rackets that are available, and most importantly, the different factors that you need to consider when choosing between rackets. And you're going to hear a lot of great advice and, you know, the proper approach to picking a racket. And that's a very important choice, obviously, because we have so many different rackets that can produce a lot of different types of balls depending on which ones you choose. So I think you will enjoy this one, especially if you are a gearhead like myself and some of my friends, a lot more so than I am. So yeah, that's about it. And we did record this episode live, as we did last week with Jorge Capistani. So you will hear some live interview elements and us answering questions. And if you're interested in joining in on those live episodes, then you can go to tennisfiles.com and then subscribe to my newsletter. You also get a cool ebook as a free gift, and then you'll hear from me whenever we have these lives going on, and obviously other content like my YouTube videos and podcasts and so forth. So, all right, with that being said, let us get into this interview on the best tennis rackets for your game. And so without further ado, here is my interview with Jean-Pierre Jounier. Hey everybody, I think we're live now, so really appreciate you coming in to join this very special live broadcast of the Tennis Files podcast. It's really a pleasure to have Coach Jean-Pierre Jounier. I hope that I pronounced that correctly.
Not so bad. No, you're good.
Thank you. Very good. And it's a pleasure to have Jean-Pierre to talk about just rackets and how we can select the right rackets for our game. It's a very popular topic, and gear is obviously important, and every little bit matters in helping us to really maximize our gains on the tennis court. So, I really appreciate Jean-Pierre coming on, and he is a tennis coach as well as an expert on YouTube, I would say, because he has a lot of great racket reviews and gear reviews, and also videos on technique and strategy and so forth. So Jean-Pierre, how's everything going for you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you, Mirban. Very glad to be with you for this live and to help players choose their racket. Indeed, it's important. And yes, I'm doing well. Very glad to be with you.
Good. Awesome, Jean-Pierre. Great. Well, I think I wanted to start off, getting a general sense of how everything is going for you, with tennis. I know it's obviously a very interesting time, tough time, and I've asked my guests this. So first of all, let us know where you're located and then how tennis has been impacted by the pandemic.
Well, for me, I live in a city very close to Bordeaux, which is usually well known for its wine.
Yes.
It's in the south of France, in the west, in the south, close to the Atlantic Sea. And indeed, it's a very special year because of this COVID. There was a period where we had to stay at home, so impossible to play tennis, of course. It started in March, and then it lasted until, if I remember well, the 11th of May. And then from the 11th of May, we could start again playing tennis, if I remember well the date, with some rules we had to respect, to be careful. But to make it simple, it was possible to play tennis from the 11th of May, and later on the competition was possible, again the tournaments in France. But well, I don't know, because I don't play in tournaments, I don't play in competitions since a few years now. But I don't know if players go to competition. I think it's going to be a year very calm concerning competitions, because I don't know, it was something players, they stopped playing, they stopped competition. Maybe there is a kind of fear of going into competition because maybe some players still think they could catch this illness. I don't know, if you touch the ball and the other player touches the ball and he was sick, maybe he can transmit you the illness. I don't know, I imagine. But I think it's very calm because most of the time I receive a lot of emails talking about tennis rackets, which racket should I choose, and so on. And I noticed that I receive a few mails currently, so it seems everything is a bit calm concerning tennis. It's the opinion, the feeling I have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the kind of the background there about how tennis is going in France and Bordeaux. Great wine, like you said. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting time, and I know there are a lot of us who we try to fill up our time with interesting things, and there are a lot of gearheads out there, myself included. So that's why I think it's really cool to have you on. And again, check out all the reviews that Jean-Pierre has done, and we'll have a link to his 2 YouTube channels. You actually have one in French and then one in English. Which came first, and then what was the inspiration for starting the second one?
Well, first I made a website. It was in 2009, if I remember well, Team-Tennis.FR. And later, in 2016, I created the French YouTube channel for several reasons. First, I wanted to talk about the website. To be honest, I wanted some more people coming to my website. So I thought talking about tennis on YouTube and talking about my website is going to be interesting. And at the same time, I made the website because I like to share what I know about tennis concerning technique, tactics, and mental skills and physical training also. And especially concerning technique, I was always disappointed by the fact of using a website to talk about technique. It's not easy to talk about technique on a website and writing what you should do. For me, well, I did it because it's okay. I didn't have another idea, another way to make it. But then when the video came and I was more used to the videos, I thought, yeah, that's the best way to give some technical advices, to use the video, because you show what players should do. So I was interested. I wanted to make to use videos to help players, because it's a really good way to help players, especially concerning technique. So for the 2 main reasons, and I was a tennis teacher for 15 years, but now I'm not a tennis teacher anymore. I do another job completely different for many reasons, but I really like teaching tennis. I really like to help players. And for me, the website and the YouTube channel, it's a way to be in the tennis, to go on, help players. So it's also a way to continue teaching without being really on the court with real students.
Yeah, but you are impacting a lot of, real great people. So it's really cool that you've chosen
That's
this
nice.
platform.
That's really nice. Yeah. And then I don't remember in which year, but later I made an English channel On my French channel, there are videos concerning racket reviews, technique, tactics, mental skills, a bit physical training. And on the English channel first, I made only racket reviews because it really takes time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to make an English channel, but only to talk about tennis rackets. And I always want to do more because I know people are interested in technique and so on. So I always say I'm going to make more videos in English concerning technique and so on. But I would like to do it. But if I find the time, I will try to do it. But in English, at the same time, there are so much content concerning tennis technique. I don't know. Maybe I can bring something because I can talk about things a bit differently. But honestly, in English, there is so much content concerning tennis. It's different in French. In French, when I started the French channel, it was the reason I was watching what existed in French, and I thought about some things I could hear. I want to say something. There is something to do. I wanted to add something to what existed in French. But because there weren't many things, but in English it's different. There is a huge content in English.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's just a great medium again. And we're already seeing some cool comments on rackets. And yeah, Hai Nguyen says talk about flex and swing weight, and we'll definitely get to that as well. And some specific racket questions. We got Suresh Babu here talking about the Wilson Ultra Tour, that it's tough to play with. So yeah, let's just launch into the rackets, racket advice, and what advice you have for us on how to select the best rackets for us. So, and we'll get to the questions as I mentioned. So first off, what are the different types of rackets that we can venture out and test? If maybe you can categorize them for us and simplify it to make it easier.
For most of the time, the category you can find, it's a control-oriented racket. Mm-hmm. It's rackets that are not going to be very powerful. Okay, when I talk about control, you must understand not much power. Okay, I don't talk, because sometimes there is we can think about control and precision. For me, it's different. When I use the word control, I don't talk about precision. When I talk about control-oriented racket, I mean a racket that is not going to be very powerful. Okay, that's a category of racket with most of the time some characteristics that make them not very powerful. Then there are some powerful rackets at the opposite. Okay, very control-oriented. We could say average, a bit control-oriented, something versatile, in between. And you have powerful rackets. That's a way to categorize rackets, just thinking about power. I think it's important. And also, you can categorize the rackets by the access to topspin you will have with the racket. Low access to top. Most of the time, we talk about spins, but when we talk about spins, in fact, we talk about topspin, because concerning the slice, it's different. And usually when players talk about spin, they think about topspin, the access to topspin. Mm-hmm. So low access to topspin, average access to topspin, and very easy access to topspin. For me, that's the categories that really comes to my mind.
And Jean-Pierre, when you talk about like the categorization, the second one of low topspin versus high topspin, is it primarily because of the string pattern, or are there also other elements that play into that categorization of spin types?
Concerning spins, yes, the string pattern is very important. I think it's a characteristic that maybe players forget a little bit. I think players don't pay enough attention to the string pattern concerning the access to topspin and concerning the power. Because to talk about string pattern, you have dense string pattern with the narrowed string pattern. For instance, 18 by 20, 18 by 19. These are narrowed string pattern with many strings on the frame, if you want. And this is going to reduce the power, reduce a bit the comfort, and reduce the access to topspin, because strings are going to be less able to move. And you have something which is average, which is 16 by 19. And then you have some open string pattern, 16 by and more open string pattern, but rather extreme if it's 16 by 16. Okay, so the more open the string pattern is, the easier you will have the access to topspin. Okay, but it's not the only characteristic, because you can have, if you only watch the string pattern, you can make mistake, because you can have a racket with a small head size. I think about if we choose something extreme, the Wilson Pro Staff 6085. You remember Pete Sampras, Stefan Edberg, Jim Courier, and so on. Very difficult racket, heavy and small head size. If I remember well, it has a string pattern of 16 by 18. We need to be sure, but I think it's that string pattern, and you won't, because of that string pattern, you won't have much power, and you won't have a crazy access to topspin. So along with the string pattern, you must give a look at the head size. Mm-hmm. Very important. So to be clear, if you want something average for the access to topspin, you take a racket with a head size of 100 square inch, 645 square centimeters, and a string pattern 16 by 19. This is very versatile, okay? The access to topspin is average with those specifications. And if you want more access to topspin, you stay on a 100 square inch and maybe 16 by 18 string pattern. So the head size is average, so it's okay. It's not going to bother you to be a problem for the access to topspin. And with a more open string pattern, you're going to increase the access to topspin. And if you want more access to topspin, you can also use larger head size, because a larger head size with the same string pattern, it's going to increase the access to topspin. I'm not very used to the size in inches, so it's a bit difficult, but if you take a head size with 660 with a 16 by 19 string pattern, you have many chances to have better access to topspin than with a 645 square centimeter head size. Okay, so string pattern, head size, it's important. And also, I would say the shape of the beam width of the racket. Mm-hmm. I think about the Babolat Pure Aero. If you look at the shape, because I don't know what you, if it's a Pure Aero you have in your hands.
I have a bunch of different rackets.
Okay.
I have one is like an older Aero.
And Aero Pro Drive, maybe.
Yeah, and then I've got the Pure Aero VS.
Which, yes, more control oriented. Yes.
Yeah, and with that, how about the 16 by 20 pattern? Like, what does that do versus 16 by 19? Is that a little more control with plus spin?
A little bit more control oriented, yes.
Gotcha.
It's a bit something between 16 by 19 and 18 by 20, obviously. But concerning feelings, I would say it's closer to 16 by 19 than 18 by 20. 18 by 20, really, you must pay attention to those string patterns that are really going to reduce the power of the racket. I see many players, they make a mistake choosing 18 by 20 string pattern. So the most versatile is 16 by 19. And then 16 by 20, you're going to have a bit more control than when 16 by 19, maybe a bit less access to topspin. The difference is not huge, but there is a little difference, yes.
So Jean-Pierre, if you're and I've struggled with this, if you're a player that hits with a lot of topspin, do you want a racket that gives you even more topspin, or do you want to go to like an 1820 or a 1620? And then I guess conversely, if you don't hit with much topspin, but you want to hit with more, then I guess you would get a more topspin-oriented racket. But can you kind of guide us on, if you hit with more topspin, should you get a more topspin-oriented racket or a less oriented one?
I sometimes have this question, and I think you must think about the game style you have. And if you conclude that you have topspin-oriented game style, you must choose a racket that goes in this direction. If not, you are going to create some problems You don't need. You need access. Your game is to put topspin. You know that string pattern 18 by 20. It's not interesting to have a good access to topspin. So it would be strange to choose that string pattern if you want to play with topspin.
Yeah,
Look at
that makes sense.
Nadal, topspin-oriented game, pure arrow, 16 by 19. He's not going to, I think he pays a lot of attention to his gear, to his rackets. And if he chooses this head size, this racket is a beam width aerodynamic, and 16 by 19 string pattern, well, it's interesting to notice and to take into consideration his choice. So you must go, the racket must fit your game.
I appreciate it, Jean-Pierre, because I remember when I was actually playtesting a bunch of different rackets, I got like 7 different ones from Wilson and a bunch from Babolat and I think 1 or 2 head rackets. And I really liked the Wilson Blade 18 by 20.
Yeah,
because the control was beautiful, like it was really nice, like so nice at the net, and I had that versus the Pure Aero VS that Babolat sent me. But then, the problem was that in the end, I chose the Babolat Pure Aero VS because that one fit my game style because I hit with heavy topspin, and it is a little bit easier to play with for me, and so. So I'm glad that I made the right choice, looking at what you said, because I didn't want to take away, my spin game, because I felt like I was hitting way flatter with the Wilson Blade 1820.
It was the latest version of the Wilson Blade?
This was actually, I think, like 3 years ago or a little less, so it was maybe the previous version. Yeah.
Was different because I played with the Wilson Blade 18 by 20, and in fact I was surprised by the access to topspin I could get with this racket. Indeed, it's not huge. Okay, you're not going to make crazy access to topspin, but I was surprised, and I really like the Wilson Blade, but the previous version, because I had a nice mix between power and control and access to topspin. Well, it was okay for me, but for someone who really needs an easy access to topspin, I understand it's not enough. But it was a bit head heavy. That's what I didn't like. And on the latest version of the Blade 98, especially the 16 by 19 and 18 by 20, it's really different for those who don't know. There is clearly less power, really, for me. Well, it depends on the player. For me, it's not enough. And there is really clearly less power than with the previous version. The balance is better. I really like the balance, but I have no more power, so it's a problem. And I think it's a bit more difficult also with the access to topspin. So I gave the advice to all the players who were used to the previous Blade 98 18 by 20. I told them, I think you're going to have some close feelings if you switch to the new Blade 98, but with a string pattern 16 by 19. Because even with the 16 by 19, you have a very good control, and it's not easy to get some power with this racket. To come back to what you were saying about the Pure Aero VS and your game, I think the most important thing when you're looking for a new tennis racket is to try rackets. You said it, you tried many rackets, and that's a good idea. That's a good idea. And, well, sometimes I'm a bit surprised by players asking me some questions. They have tried some rackets, so they have a feelings concerning their test, but they need, like my opinion, to have a kind of confirmation of their feelings. And I'm a bit surprised with that. I don't know. I think players sometimes don't trust their feelings enough. They want somebody else opinion, they are looking at the specifications of the racket, but I would say try the rackets and keep in mind that what's the most important is your feelings. How you feel with the racket. You want to put some topspin? Do you succeed putting the topspin you want with the racket? Yes, no. If it's no, even if the specifications lets you imagine that it should be possible, you don't care. At the end of the day, on the tennis court, if you don't have the access to topspin you want, there is a problem. So trust your feelings, I would say, when you try the rackets.
Yeah, great advice, Jean-Pierre. And I do know that, you can still, I think they still have these programs on sites like Tennis Express, Tennis Warehouse, where you pay like, I don't know, 15, $20, and then they'll send you like 4 or 5 rackets and you can try them. And so it's definitely worth it too. I have a friend who just did that recently. So one thing with testing rackets, Jean-Pierre, is, especially when you get them from other people, like they have different strings and tension. Yeah. So how do we deal with that? I mean, I know that some people, they don't want to take the time to change the strings, but I mean, is that something that's crucial for people to do, is to like make sure that, the string tension and the same strings are used in the different play tests because of the different feel?
Yeah, that's a question I often have. I think it's a problem for some players. For me, most of the time, I really try many rackets. So most of the time, it's not a problem. So maybe because I've always been used to try rackets. Even when I was 11 years old, I always liked to try rackets and everything. So I'm used to change, to play with any racket. So I would say to be unable to make the difference between the racket and the strings, I will need to have really a serious problem with the strings. I mean, it's going to be difficult for me, especially concerning the tension. If the strings are really loose, really low tension, something extreme, there is a problem. The racket, in fact, should be restrained. Mm-hmm. Well, very low tension, very high tension. I'm going to have a problem. But for me, apart from that, with any string, it could be monofilament, polyester, multifilament, with a correct tension around 24 kilograms. I don't know how to translate that in another measurements. Okay, which is an average tension. It's okay for me. I'm able to make the difference between the power I can get. Is it from the racket? Is it from the strings? So I know I'm able to make the difference. So I don't know why, because maybe I'm used to try some rackets. Maybe because of my game style. I don't know. I don't play very with touch. Maybe I hit the ball. Maybe I don't need to have very precise feelings. Maybe I just hit the ball and you give me whatever you want, the strings, some strings you can use for a guitar. Maybe I can play with them. I don't know. So maybe I'm not very difficult. I have no feelings though, so I can play with anything. And maybe some players who play in finesse, with doing a lot of drop, volley, drop shots. Uh-huh. Maybe they are going to feel the difference. They are used to a multi-filament, and if you give them a monofilament polyester, they are going to feel it's very rigid, very difficult. Anyway, what I can tell you, I never restrain a racket with my strings to test it. I take it as it arrives, and most of the time the tension is fine, and for me it would be the biggest problem. So as long as the tension is fine, I can make an opinion concerning the power and the feelings with the racket.
Cool. Yeah. No, it's good to know. I mean, it is comforting because, that is kind of the fear that we'll have to just restring, put the exact tension and exact same strings. But, I think that in a lot of cases, as Jean-Pierre mentioned, we'll be able to tell, the differences between the different frames, irrespective of the strings, unless there's like a huge difference or some like crazy tension difference.
What I notice is when you try some rackets, you receive a racket with a monofilament. Most of the time polyester. So there are not many differences. Not for me. There are not many big differences between polyesters. You can feel there is something different, but concerning the power. So it's going to be close, in my opinion. So if you try different rackets and all the rackets with the polyester, with the tension, which is close, I think it's going to help you have a rather clear opinion concerning the rackets.
Got it. Very cool. Very
cool. Problem. But once again, if you have very precise feelings, if you are really used to specific strings and you only like this one, maybe you should restring test racket with your strings if really you want to be sure of your feelings.
Yeah, or maybe you narrowed it down. Yeah, thanks, Jean-Pierre. Sorry if I interrupted you. So we have a question in French, so I really do need your help. But basically, I think it's a question about weed rackets. and not the other weed. So
I don't know what I don't know what so the comment says, how are you? Comment ça va? How are you? I hope you will talk about weed rackets. I don't know what a weed racket is.
Okay. Yeah. It's I don't. We might have to do some research and email us later. But weed racket, obviously, it's a certain type of different brand, and I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it myself either. So I take it that. What's that?
It's a brand?
Yeah, I think it's a brand of racket.
Okay.
Yeah. If somebody in the chat can let us know.
I give a look. It seems to be a tennis brand with big head size for what I see. I don't know this brand. To answer quickly, I'm not going to be able to give any opinion concerning weed rackets because I discovered them.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, you've done a lot of reviews on here. I've seen some great ones on like the Prinzo 3, the Babolat Pure Drive VS, and the E-Zone and so forth. But we'll have to kind of learn more about the weed rackets. But so we've got.
It seems to be special. Very big head size.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's interesting to have some easy power, really easy power. It's not a powerful racket. It's really easy power, very forgiving because of the head size. If you off-center the ball, it could be interesting in a general way when you have a big head size.
Yeah.
I don't see the weight, but interesting for players who want forgiving rackets and easy power.
Yeah.
And I don't know more about these rackets.
No worries. I know there's a lot of the ones that you will know about, I think. Have you tried the Wilson Tour, Jean-Pierre? Because it's Suresh Babu says that he's been kind of not finding it so easy to play with. So I know tour rackets in general are heavier. So you have any other thoughts on the Wilson Ultra Tour racket here?
So I haven't tested the latest Wilson Tour, any version of this series, but I know the Ultra Tour because, as you say, when you have the word Tour, the name of the racket, it's going to be a control-oriented racket most of the time. And I'm going on a website to check the specifications, but I'm not surprised by the comment. Saying that it's difficult to play with this racket.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is like I think, and this may not be the case at all or anything, but sometimes if we see like players and they're playing with tour versions, we still have to be kind of wary about what our actual game is, and don't just go by what the pro player is using and like get excited about it. But there's these days there's so many different versions of each racket. It's crazy, which is part of the reason why I have you on here, Jean-Pierre. But
there are many things to say. Something important is that you must be careful if you want to choose the same racket as your favorite player. That's a mistake you can make. You must maybe a player is your favorite player, but you must think, do I have the same game style as this player? And even if you have the same game style, it's a pro player with the power that goes along with that, the physical skills, and so on. So it's still a bit dangerous to choose the racket of your favorite players. You must know the specifications of the racket and what it's going to imply. So a racket is going to be difficult. It's not so difficult. Well, if it's too heavy for you, so I say too heavy for you because there is no heavy racket. A racket can be heavy for a player, but too light for another one. So every player must know by trying rackets what is the best weight for them. Okay, so a racket is really too heavy for you, it's going to be a problem. And then you must be careful to the head size. When the racket has a small head size, it's something under 100 square inch, 645 square centimeters. It begins to be a bit small. 98, it's not very small, okay, but it's a bit control-oriented. You must be careful, you must know what you do. So you must know it's a bit control-oriented when you choose 98, something around 632 square centimeters. And when you are under 98, something like 95, 90, and below, you must be careful. It's going to be clearly control-oriented, whatever the string pattern. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the head size, you just give a look at the head size of the Wilson Ultra Tour, you know it's going to be control-oriented. And you know you must be careful, you must be able to produce some power with your shots, because if not, you might lack some power. So pay attention to the head size, 98 and below, be careful. Pay attention to the string pattern, 18 by 20, 18 by 19, it's going to be control-oriented, even more on a small head size. 16 by 19, it's okay, it's a versatile average. Pay attention to the beam width. The smaller it is, the less power you will have. And everything, a racket that accumulates all these characteristics, small head size, dense string pattern, thin beam width, everything is going to be very control-oriented and very difficult. So when you know the specifications and the impact they will have on your feelings, it can help you avoid choosing the bad racket for you.
For sure. Thanks for that, Jean-Pierre. And so we have a couple of questions about flex. So the first one is about from Hai Nguyen. So, hey, what's up? Thanks for the question. So he says to talk about flex and swing weight.
Okay, flex. There are many things to say. Fundamentals concerning flex and stiffness. So the more a racket is stiff, most of the time, the more it's going to provide power. But you must not take you must not only watch this characteristic when you choose a tennis racket. You must watch all the characteristics of the racket. And when you give a look at the stiffness, okay, it can give you an idea of what you can expect with your feelings, but don't just look at the stiffness. Well, high stiffness, more control, less comfort. Low stiffness, what did I say? More high stiffness, more power. That's what I said?
Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah.
High stiffness, more power. Low stiffness, less power, more control. There is an exception with the Wilson Clash. I use.
I must about that.
Because it's very special. On the Wilson Clash, there is a very low stiffness, but you have a decent power with the Wilson Clash. It's not extremely powerful, but you have a decent power with the stiffness of the racket. So the Wilson Clash is a bit of an exception with its low stiffness. Concerning stiffness, so the higher it is, maybe the less comfort you will have. But it also depends on other characteristics of the racket. Because I remember I tried the Wilson Ultra, but the 100 square inch version, which has a high stiffness. I think it's 74, which is high as a stiffness. And for me, the racket was comfortable. So you must take some other things into consideration apart of stiffness. But most of the time, we say that high stiffness, it reduces the comfort, and low stiffness, it can increase the comfort. I don't know if it answers or the question concerning flex, or if you want me to...
Yeah, no, that's perfect. How about swing weight?
Swing weight. So it's a characteristic. Well, I didn't pay attention to the swing weight when I was playing tennis. I don't know if it's interesting for players to know that when I was playing tennis, because I don't play much lately compared to what I did before when I was younger. So when I played at my best level, which was it was my best level, I didn't care. I didn't know anything about the specification of the racket. The stiffness, the swing weight, the balance, the weight. I didn't know. I just picked some rackets. I played with the racket. Okay, this one it seems to be okay. Okay, I take the racket. I didn't know anything about the specifications of the racket and the impact they could have on my feelings. On the good side, that was something good in the sense that I wasn't expecting too much from my racket to improve my game. I talk about it because for some players, but not every player, of course, maybe some players pay too much attention. They expect too much from the racket to increase their level. So I was at the opposite. I could have played with any racket. I didn't care. For me, it was my job and only my job, if I wanted to increase my level. And it wasn't, the racket was not a problem. But at the same time, it was a bit extreme as a position, because now when I think about it, I think, well, I shouldn't have played with that racket. It was too difficult. For a long time, I played, for those who know this racket, with the Head Prestige 600. Very small head size, Head Prestige, very control-oriented. And I think it was a mistake for me to play with this racket. Well, so I didn't know. So we're talking about the swing weight. The swing weight, there are different weights for the racket. There is the static weight. When you take a racket in your hand, you take it with the handle like this, and you take it in front of you. In fact, you don't have an idea of the static weight of the racket. Well, to be clear, the swing weight, it's you take the racket by its handle and you move it a bit like you're hitting the ball. It's the sensation you have when you take a racket in a shop, for example, and you make some swings in the shop. And you say, oh, this racket, it seems to be heavy. In fact, you talk about the swing weight when you're doing that. When you want just to have an idea of the static weight of the racket, just the weight, you must hold the racket, but the point by which you hold the racket must be aligned with the balance point. Okay, if I just want to feel the weight of the racket, and if this racket has a balance point here, okay, I must hold the racket by this point. And like this, I have just an idea of the weight of the racket. I can also take the racket like this, okay? So the point by which I hold the racket is, of course, aligned with the balance point. And like this, I have an idea just of the weight of the racket. But as long as I take the racket like this and the head of the racket is in front of me, I can have the feeling that the racket pulls my wrist a bit down. And this is the idea, a bit of the swing weight, okay? So what can we say about the swing weight? The higher, when you watch the values of the swing weight on the websites and so on, the higher the swing weight, the lower the maneuverability of the racket. It's important. When you increase the swing weight, you decrease the maneuverability of the racket. But if you can maneuver the racket, if you can swing the racket, it can help you gain some power if you increase the swing weight of the racket.
Got it.
So the higher the swing weight, maybe it's going to help you gain some power, but it could reduce the maneuverability of the racket, and conversely, with a low swing weight.
Got it. Thanks, Jean-Pierre. So we have a go ahead.
Precise question concerning the swing weight. I don't know if I have answered the question.
No, I think you did give a good description. It's kind of a general question, but we have one from Alok. Thanks for the question. So for existing elbow shoulder issues, is there a max flex value that one should be looking for?
Once again, the stiffness is not the only characteristic you must pay attention to when you have when you want to protect your arm. Concerning only stiffness, well, I have a shoulder injury, a very serious shoulder injury that in fact requires surgery. So I pay attention as much as I can, of course, to my gear and to my racket. And to be honest, I don't know the exact impact of the stiffness on the injuries. I know that we often hear that it reduces the comfort. So I don't know, but to not take risk, for me, I'm going to choose a racket that with a stiffness between 65. It could be lower than 65. In fact, it's the case of the Wilson Clash. But except the Wilson Clash, something average, can say between 64, 65, and 69, 70. I would be careful with the stiffness above 70. Okay, but stiffness is not the only characteristic. I would just try the racket and see how it feels. I wouldn't choose a racket with a small head size. I would limit myself to 100 square inch because it helps for the comfort to have an average head size, 645 square centimeters. So I wouldn't go for a 98 because it's going to help me for the comfort. I would pay attention to the string pattern. In the past, I have played with blade 18 by 20. I wouldn't make the same choice now that I have an injury. I want something that provides some easy power. I don't want to be forced to produce big efforts, to find some power. I want the racket to help me get some power. So even I prefer making some mistakes, sending the ball too far. I prefer lacking a bit of control than having to produce big efforts to get some power. You see?
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, great stuff there. So,
attention to the strings also.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah,
you want to protect your arm, especially for tennis elbow. Tennis elbow, it's complicated because there are many factors to have a tennis elbow. So if you really want to protect your arm, it's better to use a multi-filament with a tension which is average around 24 kilograms. And if you really want to use poly strings, be careful to the tension. Don't use a high tension. There are different polys. There are some that are more or less rigid. So choose a poly that is not too rigid. And polyester strings, they are sometimes when I play with polyester, they never break. They never break. 20 hours of tennis, the strings don't break. You must restring your racket. 20 hours, it's a lot of for the strings. So I will give the advice to restring your racket if you use a polyester strings. Don't wait until you break the strings. You must feel you lose power, the tension goes too low, you lose your feelings, and when you have these feelings, you break the strings and you restring.
Yeah, 100% there. I totally agree with that. So we have, I'm not sure if you tried this racket, Jean-Pierre, but Giovanni asks, what do you think of the Technifiber 305 XTC and what category would you put in it as far as power control and so on? And so I was looking at your reviews and I know you've tested some Technifiber rackets. So I don't know if you've tested this one. So do you have any thoughts on this racket if you've tested it?
I think I have tested this racket.
So I see a T-Fight 305. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, because there is a new category of racket, of technical racket, and I have a doubt. I would just need to give a look to be sure it's the one I have tested. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no worries.
I just give a look very fast, and there is also the string pattern with which I have a doubt. So. No, it's okay. Because the new, the new series for Technifibre, I think it's TF40. TF40, I think it's something new for Technifibre rackets. And so I haven't tested the TF40. There are two rackets, TF40. I don't know, but they seem to be clearly control-oriented. So to come back to it's the T-Fight 305 XTC, I think I have tested this racket and it's control-oriented. I would say pay attention to this racket. Okay, I am on this racket. So 630 squared centimeters, a bit smaller size. So it's a bit control-oriented. The weight is rather average, but it depends on your level. For some players, it can be too heavy. Stiffness 65, it's average, but it can reduce a bit the power. Beam width around 22.5 millimeters, which is rather thin. It's going to reduce the power of the racket. And the string pattern is 18 by 20. On a head size, which is a bit small, it's going to make the racket really control-oriented. So be careful with this racket. Interesting, if you want some control. You're able to put some power, you have an aggressive game, not too much topspin. And really, if you're looking for some control, it can be interesting. If not, you can lack power with this racket.
Got it. Thanks, Jean-Pierre. So we have a question, another racket question, obviously. This one is from my friend Andrew. So, is the Head Speed MP a racket that an advanced player can play with? If not, what recommendations do you have to customize it for an advanced level player?
I would say why not? Because choosing a tennis racket is very special. It really depends on the player, and when you see which racket use different players, sometimes you can be surprised by the level of the player and by the weight of his racket. So I think about some good players. It's a bit difficult for me to talk about rankings because I'm used. I know, of course, very well the French rankings, but it's different from the rankings in the USA. So we need to know what we are talking about when we talk about an advanced player.
Yeah, I mean, for our scale is like, I guess the highest is 7.0. So like maybe a college player is probably like 5.055. I mean, a high level college player is probably a 6.0. But you know, the normal USTA League players are like between 3.5 to 4.5. Usually some 3.0s and some 5.0s.
5.0, you would say it's an advanced player?
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, no problem with the Head Speed MP for this level. No problem. I come back. Okay. In fact, Speed MP, the weight is 300 grams. And 300 grams, in my opinion, many players can use this weight, even some sporty beginners. You must be careful. If you're a beginner, don't go without testing on a racket that weighs 300 grams. But I know young, sporty players, it's not impossible to play with 300 grams. And at the same time, intermediate players, they can play with the Speed MP with 300 grams. And advanced players, I would say not very, very good players. It seems to be, for me, it seems to me a bit light if you're a very, very good player. For me, it's a bit strange. So for advanced players, yes, why not? The problem is, it depends on your feelings. For some players, you're going to have too much power with the Speed MP. For among the head rackets, the speed is something average in terms of power. Not extremely powerful, not extremely control-oriented. It's something average, so it really depends on your game style. And it can be interesting for an advanced player, I would say yes, but try the racket. If not, how to customize it? It depends. If it's too light for you, you could add some lead tape on the racket.
Where would you put it?
It depends, once again, on your things. It depends. It's really personal. If you put some weight at the balance point most of the time, it's somewhere here in the throat of the racket.
The throat, yeah.
So if you put some weight around the balance point, you're going to add some weight at the racket, but at the same time, you're not going to lose too much maneuverability. You are going to increase a bit the swing weight of the racket, but it's okay if you add some weight at the balance point. If you add some weight here at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, you are going to increase the swing weight even more. You are going to increase the power, the stability of the racket. When you want to increase the stability of the racket, you must add lead tape at the height of the contact zone. So most of the time, we had lead tape at the height of the contact zone. And be careful if you had some lead tape really at the tip of the racket, because this is really going to increase the swing weight of the racket, and you are going to decrease the maneuverability of the racket. So I would say in the throat of the racket, if you want to keep a good maneuverability, or here at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you for
Then
that.
I don't know. It really depends. You must start with maybe. The thing is, when you had some weight, you have to really balance the racket very well. So if you add some lead tape, you must add some lead tape here, and here, and here. You're not going to add some lead tape only on this side and on this side. On this side, I don't know if you see what I mean. There are four places. If you want to add some lead tape where there are the strings of the racket. Well, to be clear, here, and the same on the other side, here and here. So there is a really good balance for the racket. And if it's in the throat of the racket, well, you can just add it here in the middle of the throat, so it's going to be balanced.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thanks for that. We've got a bunch more questions. So we did touch upon this some, and with Alok, and he has a two-parter kind of. So what difference does beam thickness make? And we talked about how, the thinner, more control, thicker, more power. And then he has a specific measurements. I don't know how much, if you have any additional comments, like, because he has kind of like 23 versus 26, or 23, 26, 23 versus 24 and a half, 24 and a half, 24 and a half. What do you have any other thoughts on that?
I don't know if the question is what does each value mean? The first value, I don't know. So depending on the racket, you don't have the same beam width all along the frame. For this Wilson Clash, the beam width is the same, if I remember well, all along the frame. I'm not sure, but if not, it's really almost the same, okay? And on some other rackets, sometimes at the tip of the racket, there is a beam width. At the height of the contact zone, most of the time, you have something which is thicker, and maybe it's different when you go on this part of the racket. So the beam width sometimes is not always the same. So the first value that you have, for instance, 23, is the beam width at the tip of the racket, 26, the beam width at the height of the contact zone, and 23, the beam width here at the throat of the racket.
Yeah.
Okay, and so 24.5 all the time, it means it's 24.5 all along the frame. And if we want to compare these two rackets, I don't know. I don't know. We would need to see some other characteristics. I would say it's rather close. It's interesting to look at beam widths at the height of the contact zone because it's going to give an idea of the power of the racket. The beam width, if the beam width is rather thin at the height of the contact zone, you can expect some easy power. And if the beam width is rather thin at the height of the contact zone, maybe there will be less power. But it's important to give a look at the other characteristics at the same time.
For sure. And thanks for that. And so we have another one, specific racket. Well, actually not even a question, but he says he likes the Babolat Max Drive 110. Have you tried that? That sounds like, obviously a big head size and maybe helps you with your baseline game, perhaps.
Oversized racket, I never. Well, it's been a long time since I haven't tested an oversized racket.
Yeah.
Long ago, when I was a young player, I wanted to play with the same racket as Andre Agassi, so I chose the Prince Graphite, which was an oversized. I don't know if Michael Cheng had the same racket. It was a bad idea because I bought the racket without testing it, just because I was a fan of Andre Agassi and I wanted his racket. It's a mistake. Once again. So with an oversize, you can expect more power, more forgiveness. If you off-center the ball, it's going to be more forgiving, better access to topspin. Most of the time, it's interesting to have some easy power, so maybe that's why you like this racket. A big head size, it reduces the maneuverability of the racket. So with a small head size, you have a very good maneuverability. When I played with the Prestige 600, I had a very good maneuverability, but it was difficult to produce some power. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a compromise you need to make between the characteristics of the racket.
Yeah, for sure. And so, we Don had talked about or mentioned lead tape in his question, which we talked about. So I think we're good with that, Don. Any specific questions, let me know. And then Lisa asks, it's a cool picture here. How about rackets for juniors aged 12 to 14 hard court players? So that's a pretty specific subgroup there. So, I mean, any thoughts as to what direction they might want to go for this? These junior players on hard courts?
12 years old, most of the time it's the age when we begin to think if we shouldn't switch to an adult tennis racket concerning the length of the racket. We haven't talked about the length of the racket. For children, well, most of the time. For an adult tennis racket, it's 27 inches long, if I don't make a mistake, because I never talk in inches, in centimeters. It's 68.5 centimeters, and I'm almost sure that it is 27 inches. So for children, racket lengths are smaller. You have different lengths depending on the level of the kid and also on its size, which of course is very important. And most of the time, 12 years old, we can think about switching to, I would say, a 27-inch tennis racket. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the size of the kid. Most of the time, their size is around 150 centimeters. So it's interesting also to take into consideration the level of the kid. If he has a good level, I would say he can try to switch to an adult tennis racket, but which is going to be light, around 250, 255 grams unstrung. Okay, you must be careful to the weight of the racket. And if he's rather small, 12 years old, rather small, not a very good level, maybe beginners, why not? He could play one more year with a 26-inch long tennis racket, just to feel comfortable, to have a good maneuverability at the age where we can think about that. And then 13, 14, I think we can play with an adult racket, which is light, around 650, 660, 65 grams unstrung.
Got it. Very good. Yeah. So it obviously deals.
Some precise models in my head, but it depends on the level of the player. Yeah. But most of the time, I would recommend something that is not too extreme. So an average head size around 645, 100 square inch. An average string pattern, 16 by 19. So you don't take a risk when you choose a racket like this. And if really the kid is really good, he has some power in his shot, maybe he can consider a racket with a smaller head size around 98 square inch.
Gotcha. Cool. So we got a question about rackets from Alok. So do rackets lose life over time, like after 2 to 4 years playing 3 to 4 times per week?
Yes, good question. And not easy to answer. So what's interesting is to have in mind what makes a racket lose its qualities. So when you have a racket and you string the racket, it's very hard for the racket. I know because I string rackets, and when you string rackets, you see the frame. It really it deforms the racket. So it's hard for the racket to be when you string a racket. So the more you restring a racket, the more it loses its qualities. So you must take into considerations how often you restring a racket. But it's going to be very difficult for me to tell you once you have restrung 20 times a racket, it's completely dead. It's impossible for me to give such a precise answer. But take into you must know it's important. Also, how hard you hit the ball. If you play without too much power, it's going to be nice for the racket. But if you put a lot of power in your shots, it's going to be harder for the racket. So you must take this into consideration. I think for an average player, 4 years, 5 years, it's a long time. You can think about changing the racket after 5 years. But for some players, when I played a lot, I had to change my racket every year because I restrung all the time. I used to break strings a lot. And I played a lot. So when you play, sometimes the racket, it touches the ground on low balls, and you I don't know how to say, you scratch the racket, you lose some graphite and so on. So after 1 year, for me, the racket, it was not dead, but almost. So it depends. I would say 4 or 5 years, maybe it's the time to change the racket.
Got it. Got it. So there's a question here. I put up a lot of comments that you all made, which are great. I think correct me if I'm wrong, if we covered these, but Sud asks, could you explain what is balance and beam and racket specifications and how that influences your game?
Okay, balance. When you take a racket like this, for example, I'm looking for the balance point of the racket. I want the racket to be in balance on my finger.
Yeah.
And it's almost how the balance is measured. Well, of course, it's a bit more precise with some match instruments, but it's a bit like this. I'm looking for the balance point. Okay, it's almost there. So I have found the balance point. Then I measure the distance between the handle and the balance point. This distance. Most of the time, something average, it is 32 centimeters. Okay? 22 centimeters, it's rather neutral. And some rackets will have more weight at the tip of the racket. So we are going to say they are more head heavy. Okay? And some rackets have their weight more distributed in the handle of the racket. So we are going to say that they are more headlight. So this is going to, so we don't have the same measurements, of course, in France, and I know in the United States. So in the United States, I think you talk more about headlights, head heavy, 2 points headlights, 3 points headlights, and so on. And in France, we just talk about centimeters. Where is located the balance point in centimeters from the bottom of the handle. The more the balance point is at the tip of the racket, the more it can help you have some power, but at the same time, it's going to reduce the maneuverability of the racket. And the more the racket is balanced towards the handle of the racket, the more you will have maneuverability, but maybe it's going to be a bit more difficult to get some power from the racket. And also you are going to decrease the stability of the racket. It's important also. Anyway, the heavier the racket is, the more headlight it's going to be. Most of the racket is like this. Heavy racket, headlight racket. And the lighter the racket is, the more weight you will have at the tip of the racket, because if you have a light racket, and if in addition there is no weight at the tip of the racket, it's going to be really difficult to have some power, to have some stability.
Got it. Very cool. Thanks for that. So Brad asks, what is the best racket for older players with elbow issues?
So I would say a racket that is going to provide some easy power. I would say at least head size 100 square inch or even more. Look for an oversize. It would be even easier. Oversize, it's going to be easier for the power. It's going to be more forgiving if you off-center the ball. So the head size, definitely, it's important. Take into consideration the stiffness of the racket. Like I said before, search for something maybe between 65, 70, something around that. String pattern which is not too narrowed. 16 by 19, it would be okay. The beam width, if you choose an oversized racket, but with a very thin beam width, maybe it's not the best choice. An average beam width, I would say it's around 23, 24 millimeters. So at least this value, and you can choose even more if you want some more easy power. So pay attention to that. I would think about these characteristics.
Yeah, because there are quite a few to choose from still with those parameters.
And once again, pay attention to the strings also. Multi-filament is going to be more comfortable than polyester strings.
Awesome. So we have a question from TTL Aqui, and we only have a few minutes left. We'll see how long we can go, but or if Jean-Pierre has to leave as well. But he asks, or he or she asks, does a low balanced racket, say 305 millimeters, partially compensate its heavy weight, 320 grams?
Yes. Very interesting question. I didn't talk about that. So What's interesting is that you can have a racket which is rather heavy, which is the case with 300 grams and strength. But if it's headlight, you can have the feeling that finally it's not that heavy. And you can have a racket that is lighter, but if it's more head heavy, you can have the feeling that it's heavier. So that's important. Yes, there is a limit, of course, but you can have the feeling that a heavy racket is not that heavy if it's headlight.
Got it. Very cool. So Alok asks, what are a few examples of some really good soft polys?
Yes, not easy for me because I know strings less well than rackets. I give a look at the page, but
they have some soft versions, like they have Tourbite Soft and Luxon ALU Power Soft, but I don't know. I haven't tested those myself.
The thing is that there are many strings, so it's very difficult to test all the strings. I haven't tested so many strings, so it's going to be difficult for me. But maybe the Wilson Revolve, I played with this string, and it was comfortable. I played also with the Head Sonic. For me, it was fine. Head length also. Maybe the Babolat RPM Team. I tested this string when I tested the Babolat Pure Aero Decima, which was a pure aero, but just a special version for Roland Garros, maybe number 10 for Rafael Nadal, but in fact it was just a Babolat Pure Aero. And the Babolat RPM Team, I think it's a bit more comfortable than just the RPM.
Nice.
Maybe, yes, the Luxidon Element. I had this string. It was the first string I had when I chose the Wilson Clash, and I really liked this string. I like the feeling. So Luxidon Element, I think it's interesting. Maybe Solinco Tourbite Soft.
Mm-hmm. Somebody mentioned IsoSpeed, Richard McMichael.
IsoSpeed, never tested.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the Vocal Cyclone also.
Yeah, I play with Vocal Cyclone Tour, and the Tour version is definitely a little more comfortable than the regular version, for sure. A little softer there. Michael asks, which rackets, so he wants to know kind of maybe some specific brands and models. Which ones of these are best, are most arm friendly?
Well, I don't know if we can say that a brand produces a more arm-friendly racket than others. We can, maybe it's the occasion to talk about Prokenex, because oftentimes players talk about Prokenex when they are looking for an arm-friendly racket. Well, I talk a lot with players, and oftentimes some players told me that they had some arm problems like tennis elbow, and they switched to Prokenex and it was better. But not all the time. With Prokenex, there is something very special, which is the kinetic system. Some, some little particles that are inside the frame. When you move the racket like this, you can hear a little sound. So there is something moving into the racket, and it is supposed to increase the comfort of the racket. Well, you can try Prokenex and you see what it's like. I'm not going to say, yes, Prokenex is fantastic, it's the most comfortable racket, but it's interesting. But I think what's the most interesting is to choose wisely the specifications of your racket. Head size, string pattern, stiffness, beam width. If you choose wisely all the weight, all these characteristics, balance also, whatever the brand, you can find something interesting. It's difficult to mention some specific models. I don't know. I don't want to talk about a special brand and not to talk about another. But I think it's better to think about specifications, how to choose well the specifications of the racket.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, like all these brands, most of them are making a range of rackets that have, higher stiffness, lower stiffness, and so forth.
All the brands, for me, the quality is okay. We can say that this brand, there is a poor quality for this racket, and whereas this other brand, the quality is higher. Maybe in the past it was possible with some rackets, but now for the main brands, I think the quality is here. You will have some different feelings in depending on the brands, and you will prefer maybe the feelings of head, or maybe the feeling with Wilson or Yonex. I don't know. The feelings are just different, but we don't talk about the quality. And each brand can provide a comfortable racket. Prince racket are very comfortable. Before playing with Wilson, I had a Prince racket. It was very comfortable. I stopped playing with the Prince 2 or 100p because it was not powerful enough for me. But concerning comfort, it was great. Now I use the Wilson Clash. I like the comfort of the Wilson Clash. Sometimes I switch, I use this racket, which is a Yonex V-Core 100. Sometimes I play with this racket. It's very comfortable also. Sometimes, well, I don't play with this one anymore, but it's a Prokinex. In fact, it's too heavy for me because it's 315 grams unstrung. So I really like the comfort of this racket, but it's too heavy for me. So the problem is the weight, but it's not the comfort. So also I've played with Babola rackets. Now they have increased the shock absorption, so you can also find some comfortable rackets with Babola, with head also, but you have to choose the good racket. Head Prestige is going to be difficult, but head Speed, head Extreme, head Instinct, you can have some comfortable racket. Technifibre are the same. You can find in any brands, but choose wisely the specifications of your racket.
100%. So I think we're going to, as far as the questions that were submitted, which I really appreciated. Again, it was a lot of fun answering these questions, or having Jean-Pierre answer them mostly. Mary's question, a good one. So you mentioned, I think at the top of the episode, that when you speak of control, you don't mean precision. So can you define what you mean when you speak of control versus precision?
Well, for me, but it's important to, because most of the time in forums and websites and so on, sometimes there are some discussions, but we are not sure the different people talk about the same thing. Most of the time, what I see on the website, when we talk about control, and we see that also the way tennis rackets are categorized, for me, control is the opposite of power. Control-oriented racket is a racket that is not going to provide much power. Okay? So, big control, low power. Okay. And much power, low control. That's how I understand control. I mean, when I lack control with a racket, I hit the ball and the ball goes too far. I always make mistakes sending the ball too far behind the baseline. Okay, I lack control. The racket is too powerful for me. I don't know, I send the ball anywhere, but especially too far behind the baseline. And when I talk about precision, in fact, it's not fun in my reviews that I say that I lack precision with a racket. I talk most of the time about control. And precision for me, it's more lateral precision. When you have a very flexible racket, it can reduce the precision, because the more flexible the racket is, the more the frame is going to bend. So there's going to be a deformation of the frame when you hit the ball. And this deformation is going to bring a lack of precision in your shot. And if you have a very rigid racket, the frame does not bend, so there is no deformation when you hit the ball. So in this way, you don't lose precision because the frame does not bend when you hit the ball. So when the frame bends, you can have a a decrease in the precision, but more lateral precision. I think about that. But really, for me, it's difficult to feel that when you play with a racket. Because when you're used to play with flexible racket, most of the time, very flexible rackets, it's a bit difficult to play with them. So it's more for good players, very flexible racket. Good players, most of the time, they have a good technique, precise and fast swings. So they adapt themselves and they don't feel they lose precision because of that deformation of the frame, because of the flexibility of the frame. I don't know if it's clear.
No, I think that's very clear.
Okay.
Appreciate the explanation there, Jean-Pierre. So yeah, I mean, some great stuff. A lot of really good questions. I want to just educate people to make sure that they know where they can check out your content. So what is the best place to follow you and then watch your videos and other content?
So it depends on your language. It depends if you speak French. If you speak French, you can go on my website, which is Team-Tennis.FR. There is a dash between Team Tennis, but if you go on Google, and you type Team Tennis, you will find the website, Team-Tennis.FR. Then there is my YouTube channel, same thing on YouTube, Team-Tennis.FR. You will find, I think most of the time, my French channel where there is most of my racket reviews. And there is also my English channel, Team-Tennis.FR English. I added English in the name of the channel. And so you have the latest reviews I have made. At the beginning, I only made reviews in French, but now I try to make the reviews in French and in English.
Awesome. That's great to hear. And thank you for providing that. And we'll have these links, all the links to your website and YouTube channels in the show notes. What was that, Jean-Pierre?
I will give you the links for...
Perfect. I actually wrote them down. I think I should have most of them already. But so just to cap off, and again, great session. Appreciate it. We've got nice comments here. Thanks both for this live chat. Very informative. Thank you there. To sum up, briefly the approach to finding the right racket for your game, what advice would you give us?
I would say if the feelings you want with your racket are very important for you, you don't want to make a mistake, you must try some rackets, okay? Even if you understand very well the impact of racket specifications on your feelings, which is my case, I know specifications of the rackets, I know I can make mistakes if I only watch tennis racket specifications. And I need to really try the racket on the court to see if it really fits my game. So it's interesting for you to know the specification of the racket because there are many rackets on the market. And you are not going, if you want to try some rackets, there is a huge choice and you are going to be completely lost. So learn about the specification of the tennis rackets. What can I expect from a big head size, average, small head size, string pattern, stiffness, and so on. Everything we talked about. That is going to help you filter among all the rackets you will find. And then you pick up some rackets and you really try them on a course to see your feelings.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, that's the name of the game. Ultimately, you don't want to be in the position where you just look online and just click the buy button. You definitely want to.
I know many players do that. It's risky. Risky.
Yeah. I mean,
there is a big part of luck if you do that. If you're a beginner, I would say that there is no problem because you have no feelings. You start. You are going to build your feelings. So if you're a beginner, well, pay attention to the weight, head size, take something average, it's okay. But if you already have some feelings and you know that with some rackets, you are not going to be able to play with them because you don't like at all, you need to try the racket.
Awesome. Yeah, that's it. That's the name of the game. So I just want to thank everybody. I'm just typing in the chat, so sorry for that quick pause. But yeah, thank you to everybody for the kind messages, and it was really a lot of fun. And thank you, Jean-Pierre, for spending all your time today to give us this advice on rackets. And for those of you listening live, this episode will be published next week, next Wednesday morning, audio format on the podcast. And it was a pleasure. So thank you, Jean-Pierre, and everybody have a great day and be well.
Thank you, Merban. I hope it will help players to choose their racket. And anyway, it was very nice for me to be with you in this live. Take care, everyone, and have fun playing tennis. Have fun.
Yes, that's
very
number
important.
one. Number one. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. All right. I really hope you enjoyed my interview with Coach Jean-Pierre Jounier. I really appreciate him coming onto the show and dropping his knowledge about tennis rackets and how we should best approach choosing them to help maximize our games. And I'd also really appreciate it if you would leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast, and you can do that in your podcast app of your choice that you use to listen to the show, particularly Apple Podcasts. It's a great place to leave a review, and also Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. I find that Apple Podcasts seems to hold the most weight and number of people listening. I guess that speaks to Apple's dominance in the mobile phone game and electronics and so forth, computers. But in any case, I guess I have that kind of on my mind because I recently dropped my phone while on a run. So the screen's kind of messed up right now. I actually had a screen protector on for a year and a half and then got a little frustrated with them cracking more often than not and took it off for a bit and the actual screen cracked. So a little aside from the normal podcast route, but I'm sure some of you feel my pain. Hopefully not many of you. So use a screen protector, find a good one. Especially when you're using your phone to record videos and things like that on court or train, it's a good idea. And my phone just rang as I am speaking about it, so I wonder if you might have heard that ring, and we'll keep that in. I also will have all the links mentioned during the show on the show notes page. And this particular episode will house the show notes at tennisfiles.com/162 for episode 162. And you can do that with any episode you like, except future ones because they're not up yet, of course. But let's say you wanted to check out the links and show notes for episode 158, you go to tennisfiles.com/158. And I also would like to leave a quote for you as I do at the end of each show. And this one is by unknown, at least as far as I can find. But quote is, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, bring others along." And that's a great one that I just actually heard as well during my meditation session this morning. And I think it's a really great one. And obviously, when you look at all the great tennis players, they have great teams around them. I mean, even great amateur players and champions, they have, great coaches and mentors and people around them and practice partners. So it's definitely a great approach to, if you want to go far, bring others along with you. All right, well, that is pretty much it for this episode. I really do appreciate you listening. And like I said, if you have time to leave a review for the show, if you haven't yet, then that would be very much appreciated. I actually want to highlight a really nice interview that I got, a really nice review that was submitted somewhat recently. I used to read a lot of these off, and I kind of took a hiatus on that, but here's one by Team-Tennis.FR. Just want to shout you out. And you said that I listen to almost every tennis-related podcast on the web. The Tennis Files podcast is among my favorites and one of the best available. Excellent mix of guests, coaches, pros, trainers, playtesters, and more. Check it out and you won't be disappointed. So really appreciate that, Timmy. Thanks a lot for leaving that review and the 5 stars and so forth. And I just really appreciate that. And I really enjoy interviewing the best minds in tennis and then bringing that knowledge to you. And it's a lot of fun for me. And, especially with it bringing a lot of help to your game and tips and everything. And you never know which tip it is or a piece of advice or quote or saying that might actually really help your game a lot. So it's always good to keep trying to learn and to implement things above all, and then to try to improve every day. That's the name of the game, and that's what keeps life exciting. So, all right, thanks a lot for listening. Stay safe, enjoy yourselves, and we will see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast.